In this video lesson, we're going to be talking about making selections. Making good selections is crucial in professional retouching. It enables more accuracy in color matching, color correcting, grading, and compositing. I'm going to be covering 3 useful methods for making selections that are mainly used in commercial retouching of various genres, namely color range, the pen tool, and channel masking. Color range is not necessarily as accurate as channel masking or using the pen tool, but it can still be very useful when there is an area of strong or defined color in your image that you're trying to select. All you need to do to get to color range is go up to select and drop down to color range. Now, as you can see here, I've got this dialog box open and it gives me a visual representation of what the selection will look like. If I click image, I no longer get that representation, so I like to have selection clicked. Then if I drop down on the select menu, I can also select various colors within image, such as blue. And you can see it's picked up on the areas where there's blue in the image. Or I could try cyan for the eyeshadow as well, and you can see it's picked up some of the areas that have cyan in the image. But I don't have the ability to use the fuzziness slider or the range slider. So what I'm going to do is go up and click sampled colors. Now, the fuzziness slider is the range of colors that it'll pick up on, or the spectrum of colors that it'll pick up on. If you have your fuzziness slider down very low, it'll pick up on only the color you select or you click on. And as you can see, that's a very specific color right there. And if I broaden that selection, you'll see it starts to include more colors within that spectrum or range of colors there. And then what you'll notice is that I currently am not able to use my range slider. And this is because I don't have localized color clusters selected. So I'm going to click localized color clusters, and then I'm going to select my eyedropper tool, and I'm going to select the color of the background. It's just for demonstration purposes. And what you'll see is as I move my range, it'll limit the area of the image from which it'll select. So this is going and it's honing in on exactly where I clicked. Whereas if I bring it up, it'll broaden that area. So if you wanted to select your whole canvas and you were trying to select the background, for instance, I would take localized color clusters off. If, however, you are going for a specific area of your image, like we are with this eyeshadow, I would turn it on. And now I'm just going to zoom in here and I'm going to make sure my eyedropper tool is selected. And I'm going to click on the eyeshadow. And as you can see, it's selected that blue. And I'm just going to lower my range and I'm going to move my fuzziness around a bit to see where I can get a good balance of things. And I think round about there is fine. But as you can see, the deeper blue here is a very different blue to the more cyan blue in this highlight area of the eyeshadow. So if you want to add more colors to your selection, what you can do is either press Shift or this plus eyedropper tool here. I'm going to press Shift and you'll get a plus icon there. And then I'm going to click on the colors I would like to add. And I'm just going to click around a bit. I can sort of see from the selection box here that there are some areas that aren't being selected yet. So I'm going to click around a bit more and just try and select that blue as accurately as I can. So now if I went too far and I added, let's say, a warm skin tone, what I could do is I could take that back by pressing the minus tool, or I could remove a color from the selection by pressing Option. I'm going to do that and just try and get back to where I was and just try and limit the selection to the eyeshadow there. And I'm just going to try and add a little bit more to that eyeshadow. Just going to try and up the fuzziness slightly. It doesn't bother me that this mask is showing through in more areas than one, and that's because I'm going to work with the mask, and I'll show you how we do that now. So now all I need to do is press OK, and as you can see, we get these marching ants. This visual representation of your selection is generally called marching ants. So all I'm going to do to apply this is click on an adjustment layer, and it'll now apply that as a mask. I can Alt-click on the mask to see my selection now. So as you know, with masks, white reveals and black hides. So we want a relatively black and white mask. We don't want these gray areas in. We just want the area that we've selected with the color range, with the eyeshadow, to be fairly black and white. You can have some gradient of gray on the edges, but we want this block to be white and the rest of the image to be black. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the lasso tool, and I'm just going to go around the eyeshadow. And I'm going to Command-Shift-I to invert. You can see there it's inverted the selection. I'm then going to right-click and fill, and I'm going to fill with black. And as you can see, that's now removed all the areas that I didn't want selected. But this still needs some more work. And I'm going to use the dodge and burn tools and the brush tool to clean up this mask now. You might find it strange that I want to use the dodge and burn tools on a mask, and I'll explain why I want to do this. So with the dodge tool, if I press it here, I can set it to either be the shadows, midtones, or highlights. And I like to set it to highlights. And I'm going to use quite a high exposure here. The exposure is the strength of the effect. And basically what happens is that if I've got the dodge tool set to highlights, it'll take light areas in the image and brighten them up to being white. And if I do the same with the burn tool, if I get the burn tool and I set it to shadows, it'll take darker areas of the image and it'll darken them down gradually to being black. I'll show you what I mean by that now. So if I just start burning this area here, you can see that with the exposure being on 67%, it does it quite quickly. If I wanted to do it more gradually, I could lower that exposure. And you can see that it slowly, if you go over the same area a few times, it just burns that down to black. Obviously, burning is darkening and dodging is lightening. So just going to continue doing that. And why this is useful in masks is that if I were to go to an area of pure white or close to white, a very highlighted area, it wouldn't have much effect. And this means that I can be a little bit more free with my hand, and I don't have to be as careful as I'd need to be with the brush tool. I can, for instance, go here and sort of bleed into the white with my strokes, but it's not necessarily darkening those down. It's only darkening down the areas that have some shadow detail in them. I'm going to continue with this eye for a bit, and I'm just going to burn that down. I'm going to move across to here and continue burning that down. And I'm just going to get it close to where I want it. I don't want that eyelash selected there. And then I'm going to switch to the brush tools for the broader work. And I'm going to just clean up the last of those little specks of light outside of the selection. Then I'm going to do the same with the dodge tool, and I'm going to start brightening this up. And the other eye. And then again, I'm going to switch to the brush tool. I'm going to set it to white by pressing X. And I'm just going to clean up those areas inside there that were too dark to be dodged. And that is, I think that's good enough. So now what I can do is I can go to my curve and I can darken the area if I want to. I can add some green to the area if I wanted to go for a more turquoisey blue. I might want to lower that slightly. Or I could take some red out of that blue to make it more and more cyan. You can see that we've now created a selection and been able to adjust an area of the image using color range as our method of selection. The next and one of the most accurate methods of making selections is the pen tool. It takes a little getting used to initially, but it is the primary method of creating selections in commercial retouching studios. You will find the pen tool in your toolbar on the left here. And you don't need to be too confused by the drop-down menu. I'll show you how to get to all of that with shortcuts. So all you need to do is you place a point on your canvas, and then you create another point, and you continue around. And basically what the pen tool does is it creates a path which then can be made into a selection. And if you go back to your initial point here, you can click on it and you'll see with that round circle there, it means that you can close the path. So I've got my paths palette open here. I can see that it's got the selection as a path. It's got this path here. So if I command and click on that, I'll then have a selection. And generally with the pen tool and creating paths, you want to feather your selections. But you always want your selection to be feathered by the same amount as the edge that you're trying to select. And I'll explain this in a little bit more detail later, but basically to feather your selection, you just go Select, Modify, and Feather, or you can press Shift F6. And you can feather it by however many pixels you'd like. If you've got a relatively sharp area, you might want to consider feathering it by something around 0.8. And this will just mean that you won't have a straight edge. You'll have a little bit of a softer edge to your selection. One thing to note is that if you haven't saved your path, and I'll show you how to do that now, but if you haven't saved your path and you start creating a new path, it'll overwrite your old path. And that can be a very frustrating mistake to make. So what you need to do is you just need to double click on your path, label it to what you want. Then if you were to start a new path, it would create a separate path and it won't overwrite your initial one. It's also very important to make sure that your path is set to Combine Shapes. This will mean that if you make a path and then create an overlapping path, when you click in your paths bar here, it'll create one path from the two of them. That's really important when you're pathing more complex shapes. You can also create a curvature in your path if you want to not just create straight lines. So all you need to do is you add a point, and then when you add your next point, you just drag down and you'll get these little arms. And these arms act like magnets with the path. And if you press Alt or Option and click on the arm, you can move it to adjust it to any sort of curve you'd like. And then you just can continue doing that. And you'll get used to sort of dragging it in the direction you need it so that you don't necessarily have to use the optional Alt key. And you can sort of get the curve you'd like just through the correct drag. So I'm going to close that off. And then the paths are fully adjustable as well. So if you wanted to, you could add a point to your path just by clicking on the path. And you can subtract a point from your path just by hovering over that point and then clicking in it. And then you can move one of the points by Command clicking on that point. And again, Alt click to move the little arms around. So let's just delete this path. Then the other thing I wanted to show you was how you can get a path to have an area of it that is not selected. I'm going to path the shape of a donut. So we're going to have the outer ring, but we don't want the inner ring of the donut selected. So if you'll just use your imaginations with me and pretend that this is a path that looks like a donut. I'm going to close that there. And we can, if we wanted to, remove that point. So I'm going to add a point in the center here. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to choose Subtract Front Shape. I'm just going to continue making a path in the center here. This is a very bad donut, but it'll show you what I mean. And now when I go to my paths and I Command click, it'll select only the outer area and it doesn't select that inner area. I'll show you if I now fill this with a color. It has created that donut shape. Always remember to put your path back to Combine Shapes once you finish subtracting from the shape. So you might be watching this and thinking, why on earth would I waste so much time torturing myself with this pen tool? And I'll explain. When we're preparing commercial images for high-end fashion or beauty brands, some of the imagery goes to print, some will end up in magazines such as advertising, and some will end up on massive billboards. So when specific adjustments are requested by the client on a complex detail such as this earring, there's absolutely no way you can handle these adjustments with just brushes or your manual freehand selections, or even with most automated selections. In a case like this, you can see that there's white in the background and there's white in the sparkly areas of the earring. So getting a good enough level of contrast would be difficult for most automated selection methods. So that's why being able to use the pen tool and work with it on such detailed elements of any image is an absolute necessity, and it's a skill that's required for most professional retouchers in commercial and advertising photography. So let's say, for example, that the client wants a golden earring instead of a silver one. Now, I'll show you how easy that is to do now that we've got the ability to make selections from paths. Now I've saved you the trouble of watching me path out this complex shape here, and I've already created a mask from a path which I've added to this earring group I'll show you here. So as you can see, I would have gone around the outer edge with combine shapes set, or my pen tool set to combine shapes. And then I would have gone in and pathed each one of these individual areas out. And I just wanted to also show you that if we go here to the edge, this is what you can see by a feathered edge. It's not a one straight hard line. There's a nice gradient there. So it's a soft edge, and that's because if you look at the actual earring, it's not completely sharp. So you don't want your mask to be completely sharp. All I need to do now is I've got these earrings pathed out, obviously, and I've got this group for them. I've got an adjustment here ready to recolor them with. And all I've done is I've removed the stone from that path on the gradient map you can see here. And all I need to do is add that layer, and then I'll have my golden earring instead of a silver one. So pathing is actually considered an important part of your file prep. And this is because you need to keep in mind that the client can come back and ask for revisions on your adjustments at any stage. And you'll be in great shape for that if you've saved your paths within your PSD. So that's how you can create selections with paths. I know that it does come across as tricky, but it is a little bit like driving, and it's tricky at first, but you get used to it and it does become like second nature. It can even be a little bit meditative, just quietly going around and pathing in your file prep. Lastly, let's look at channel masking. This method of making selections is used for edges that are difficult to select with the pen tool, such as fur, fluffy clothing, and hair. If you press Command 3, 4, and 5, you'll see that you'll cycle through your channels here. And as you know, there are 3 channels within RGB: the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. So 3 takes you to red, and you can see the lighter areas are areas that have more information, and the darker areas are areas that have less information in this channel. And then 4 is your green channel, and 5 is your blue channel. And what you're looking for as you're cycling through these layers is you're looking for the channel that has the most contrast between the foreground and background. And in this image, I think it's the blue channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this blue channel into the new channel icon here. And I'm going to have now a copy of that blue channel. I'm going to use this to make a selection of the hair. Now, there's quite a good level of contrast between the foreground and background here. So I'm not going to need to do too much, but all I need to do is press Command M, and I'll get a curve that I can apply to this channel. And I'm going to click on the white or the background, and I'm going to click on the lightest area I can find of the hair, or a light area of the hair. I'm going to create some contrast. I'm going to increase the contrast in the image. You don't want to increase the contrast too much. If I was to make an extreme curve, you'll see here that the edge of the channel now becomes unpleasing and it's just too strong an edge. You want some gradient between your black and your white for a realistic edge. So I'm going to go to somewhere about there, and I'm going to OK that. And then, much like when we use the color range tool, I'm going to use dodge and burn to help me clean up this selection. So I'm going to have my burn tool, and I'm going to have it on shadows, except this time I'm going to take the exposure down because I don't want it to be too strong an effect. And I'm going to go to the edge here, and I'm just going to darken up this edge. I can be quite broad with my brush strokes because I am using the burn tool. And let's just zoom out slightly. Then I'm going to get the brush tool and I'm going to set it to black, and I'm going to again just brush in these additional areas. And then it's always good to check. Sometimes with bright areas, your eye can be tricked and you can't see that it's not full white or full black. So I'm going to Command I and invert my selection. And as you can see, this part of the mask or of the channel wasn't as dark as this part, and it's not pure black. So I'm going to get the burn tool now, and I'm just going to have a nice soft brush, and I'm going to go around and darken that area. And much like before, I'm going to get the lasso tool, and I'm going to go around, and I'm just going to select the hair, and I'm going to Command Shift I, and I'm going to fill that. with black. And then you always want your hair edge to be relatively soft. You don't want to have sharp edge between your hair and your skin. So I'm going to just soften up this hairline just very quickly. And I want to see what's going on with the ear here. So I'm going to press the RGB as well, and that'll show me my channel mask. And I'm now going to paint around that ear so that I can see what's going on there. Nice and soft as well. And then I've now got, if I take off my RGB, I can clean up that mask a little bit more. And I've now got a good hair mask. If we just zoom in a little bit, I can use this to make adjustments to the hair now. So all I need to do to create a mask out of this is Command and click, and I'll get my marching ants. And then I can then apply it to a curve. And if I had a grade that was darkening the image too much and the shadows were crunching, and crunching means that they're losing all their detail, you can't see any shadow detail, I could either brighten the hair, or if I wanted to, I could do the opposite and darken the hair if I wanted to have a more contrasty effect. That doesn't look too good. Or I could add some more red to the hair, make it a slightly more maroony color, and kind of do anything I need to with that hair selection. So just a note is to remember that if you are making files for print, so if you're making flat TIFFs for print, generally your additional channels are saved into your TIFF format. And most printers can't read files that have additional channels apart from the RGB channels. So it's just really important to, before you flatten your image and save it as a TIFF for print, to delete your channels. So that's how you make selections with color range, the pen tool, and channel masking. With these three methods, you should be able to achieve professional selections in most retouching situations.